In 1959, in just 8 days, a dictator fled, a revolution triumphed, and a small island shook the world. But where did this story begin? From the mountains, from a young lawyer, and from an Argentine doctor who was willing to fight to the end for freedom. This is the story of the Cuban Revolution. Cuba, in the early 20th century, had only been a few decades away from its independence from Spain. But the reality was that it was still breathing under the shadow of the United States. The country's economy, trade, and even politics moved according to Washington's will. In the 1920s, Cuban President Gerardo Machado came to power with promises of progress. At first, development projects began, but little by little, corruption and repression grew. In 1933, the Great Depression reached Cuba as well. The price of sugar, the country's most important product, collapsed. Workers lost their jobs, the people became poor, and uprisings began. That same year, even the army grew dissatisfied. And in the middle of all this, a simple surgeon named Fulgencio Batista rose to power. With the help of military unions, he rebelled against President Machado and caused his downfall. After that, a period of instability began, which was called the 100 Days Government. But Batista was smarter than just standing by. With a military coalition, he took full control of the army and in practice ruled the presidents who came after from behind the scenes. After 1933, Batista became the man behind the Cuban politics. Whoever became president had to have his approval. In 1940, Batista decided he would no longer stay behind the curtain. He stepped right into the spotlight and through elections became president. Interestingly, during this term, he was not a dictator. A new and progressive constitution was even passed, which strengthened workers' rights and social reforms. But after one term, he handed over power and went to the United States. Cuba entered the 1950s, but the politicians who came after once again dragged the country into corruption and instability. Batista, who was living a comfortable life in the US, was tempted to return. But this time, his return was not with the people's vote. In 1952, just months before the elections, polls showed Batista had no chance of winning. So he did something that became etched in the history books. A bloodless coup. He overthrew the sitting government and once again became president, but this time with an iron fist. Havana in the 1950s turned into a paradise of gambling, cabarets, and American investors. Behind this glamour, ordinary people lived in poverty, and every voice of protest was crushed with violence. This very situation lit the spark for one of the most famous revolutions of the 20th century. In the early 1950s, a young lawyer named Fidel Castro was fighting Batista's dictatorship through legal means. But when he saw that the law wasn't working, he decided to turn to weapons. On July 26, 1953, Fidel, along with about 160 men, attacked the Mankato barracks. His goal was to seize the weapons and ignite a nationwide uprising. The attack failed. Many of his comrades were killed, and he himself was captured. In court, he delivered a famous defense: "History will absolve me." His words became a symbol of resistance against Batista. Fidel was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But 2 years later, under internal and international pressure, Batista released him and the other political prisoners. Castro went to Mexico. There, he met an Argentine doctor, Ernesto Che Guevara. Che joined his group and quickly became one of the leaders. In November 1956, with a small yacht called Granma, 82 men set sail from Mexico toward Cuba. On December 2nd, they reached the southeastern coast of Cuba. but almost all of them were ambushed by government forces and killed or captured. Only about 20 survived. Among them were Fidel, his brother Raul, and Che Guevara. This small group made its way to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. From there, the guerrilla war began. Local peasants gave them food and shelter. Little by little, they gathered more fighters and attacked outposts and government centers. 2 years passed. In the Sierra Maestra Mountains, the guerrillas grew stronger and more famous. Each small victory of theirs gave the people more hope. But Batista was still confident he could crush them all. In summer of 1958, he launched the army's biggest operation against the guerrillas. Hundreds of soldiers with tanks and airplanes advanced toward the mountains. But here, the land and the people were with Castro. The guerrillas repelled the attacks and pushed the army back. This defeat was a turning point of the revolution. From this point on, the initiative was in the hands of the rebels. In the fall and winter of 1958, Castro and Che Guevara began advancing town by town. The climax came in the Battle of Santa Clara. Che Guevara and his forces stopped and captured an armored train full of weapons. This blow destroyed Batista's last military hope. On New Year's Eve 1959, Batista fled with his family and close associates. On January 1st, revolutionary forces entered Havana. On January 8th, Fidel Castro entered the capital amid the cheers of thousands. Batista's regime had fallen. Cuba entered a new era, an era that changed the world. But the story did not end here. Cuba very quickly chose a new path. Fidel Castro steered the country toward communism and allied with the Soviet Union. This meant that the United States, which had long supported Batista, now stood against Cuba. In 1961, the US supported a group of exiles to overthrow Castro's government. But the Bay of Pigs operation ended in humiliating failure. A year later, the world came to the brink of nuclear war. The Soviets secretly brought nuclear missiles to Cuba. The US found out, tensions rose, and finally, with an agreement, the missiles were withdrawn. From then on, Cuba became a symbol of resistance against the United States and an inspiration for revolutionary movements across Latin America. Che Guevara went to other countries to export the revolution. But for the Cuban people, this revolution brought both achievements and hardships. After decades, Cuba still remains under the weight of that very revolution. US sanctions, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and poor economic management have plunged the country into poverty, shortages, and mass migration. Today, even long blackouts and power cuts are part of daily life. Every day, electricity is cut for hours, and families are left in unbearable heat without air conditioning or even refrigerators. And what about the countries where the Che Guevara tried to export the revolution? In Congo, his project failed and achieved nothing. In Bolivia, he himself was killed and the movement was completely destroyed. None of these countries reached the promised dream. Most of them fell into political crisis, dictatorships, and weak economies. What remained was not a revolutionary paradise, but a symbol that survived more on posters and t-shirts than in the real lives of people. This was the result of a revolution that was supposed to change the world, but in practice, it led most countries into dead ends. If you found this story interesting, follow Time Warriors. Until the next video, goodbye.